I call the February 6th meeting of the Legislative Commission and Pensions Retirement to order. A quorum is present. First order of item on the agenda is approval of the meeting minutes from January 30th, 2023. Is there a motion to approve? Senator Murphy moves approval of the January 30th, 2023 meeting minutes. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion to approve the January 30th meeting prevail, and the meetings are adopted. So we are hearing bills today, members. Our next item of business is to hear a presentation on the Minnesota State Retirement System, the 2023 administrative bill. Members, our plan will be to hear these three planned administrative bills, incorporate an amendment that combines the three bills together, and then pass along to each chamber. So does anyone have any questions about what we're doing today? Okay. So before we hear from our testifiers, I will let our nonpartisan staff explain the bill and the technical, the A1 amendment, and then, so if Executive Director Susan Lincheski, if you could go ahead and explain House File 1199 or Senate File 1308.
Good morning. I'm not sure this is working. Yeah. There. Great. Good morning. I'm going to do a very brief walk through the bill, which is, let's see, what is it? It is HF 1199 and SF 1308. I will also briefly describe the amendment, and then Aaron Leonard is here to talk about background and why these changes are needed. Section 1 of the bill makes a very minor change to conform the state patrol plan with the other MSRS plans. Under the current law, state patrol members are able to apply for a pension anywhere up to 90 days prior to the start of their annuity. This changes that 90 days to 60 days. This will make this plan consistent with the other MSRS plans. Section 2 of the amendment also makes a plan consistent with the other MSRS plan. This plan is the judge's plan. A few years ago, we amended the PERA plans to do this, and then we also, a couple years ago, amended the MSRS plans. This is to add an additional right to purchase credit, service credit, for periods of military leave. So under current law, all the plans comply with the federal requirement, which requires a plan to allow a member to leave, do a period of military service, and then come back and purchase that military service so they will have credit toward their pension. The changes made a few years ago in the PERA and MSRS plans were to expand that right. So this we are calling sort of a state governed right to military service credit. This allows for purchase of service credit for periods prior to what the federal law would require. So if someone leaves, in two cases, if they leave during a period of, prior to being appointed or elected a judge, if they have military service, oh gosh, I'm very sorry, it's too early. Okay, the federal requirement is just for purchasing service during a period of public employment. So someone leaves, does their service, comes back, federal law requires them to be able to purchase service credit. The state law that we passed a few years ago would allow for a purchase of service credit prior to public employment, and then during the period of public employment if they fail to satisfy the timing requirements for purchasing that leave. So the changes made here to the judge's plan are to bring in that state-governed right to purchase leave into this plan, and that would make it consistent with the other plans. The amendment is a technical amendment. It makes some changes to the judge's right here to purchase leave, one of which is to remove the administrative fee of $250. This is something that MSRS would not charge anyway. And then to fix some language at line 4.17, and then finally to add a new section to the bill, which would amend 356.551, which is the place where you can find how this purchase is to be, how this cost of the purchase is to be calculated. So it's just inserting this new statute in 490, which is the judge's chapter, into 356.551. Sorry for the stumble. I'll pull it together. Thank you.
And Senator Murphy is the chief author on the Senate side. And would you like to move the A1 amendment, Senator Murphy?
Madam Chair, thank you. I'd move the A1 amendment.
Thank you. Any discussion on the A1 amendment? Seeing no discussion on the A1 amendment, one second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The motion to move the A1 amendment prevails, and we're back to the bill as amended. Do we have any testifiers here for the A1 for the underlying bill?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Leonard is here.
Thank you, Director Leonard.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. My name is Erin Leonard, the Executive Director of MSRS. Ms. Linczewski explained the bill well. The first provision is to allow our State Patrol Plan members 60 days prior to retirement to submit their retirement applications. This is the same for all of our other plans. Currently, it's 90 days in statute, so this would provide some administrative consistency. Then the other change is to expand the deadline for purchasing leave while a judge is on active military service if they were to do that. This does not extend the prior purchased military service to judges because they are elected officials. So slightly different, but it is consistent as far as the deadline goes for leave while they're a judge. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions from members? Yes, Senator Howe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And is it, I understand why you want to move the 90 days to 60 days for the State Patrol for consistency, but why not move it the other way and go from 60 days to 90 days to allow that consistency instead of shortening up the period for one? Lengthening the period for everyone would seem to give everyone a consistent, and it, to me, would give you staff more time to make all of that. It would actually be better for staff if it was 90 days rather than 60 days, I guess that's why I'm asking the question, why are we shortening the time period and not lengthening the time period for everyone?
Director Leonard.
Madam Chair, Senator Howe, 60 days is actually a really good time frame. It's consistent with what like CGIP and the insurance folks require is at least 60 days. So it's kind of, people are in that mindset. And you wouldn't believe it, but a lot of things can happen between 60 and 90 days. Marital status changes, people change their minds for their survivor coverage, those sorts of things. So that 60 days is actually a really good sweet spot for making those types of decisions.
Follow up, Senator Howe. Okay. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a brief question. Is there any actuarial impact or fiscal impact on our pensions with either of any of these changes that we're speaking of in this bill 1199?
Director Leonard.
Madam Chair, Senator Nelson, there is not a fiscal impact. We would only submit something in an administrative bill that was purely administrative.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Okay, seeing no further discussion, I will move to lay over this bill until later in this meeting. The next item of business is to hear a presentation of the Public Employee Retirement Association, the 2023 administrative bill. It is labeled with revisor number 23-03171. Before hearing our testifiers, I will also ask Ms. Linczewski to go over the bill and to please explain PERA 2023, the administrative piece of it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This bill is the PERA administrative bill. The bill has 3 articles. The first article is to change the salary threshold for being required to be a member in the PERA plans from an annual threshold, which is $5,100, to a monthly threshold of $425. As I explained in the memo, this is intended to reduce some administrative errors that have been occurring when a member, in fact, does exceed the threshold after a year, and the plan then needs to correct missed employee and employer contributions. Article 2 amends a number of statutes in the PERA plan chapters to make the definition of dependent child consistent throughout. So instead of having a cutoff at 18 and then some additional 5 years if it's in certain cases, this changes the requirement to age 23. So So anybody who exceeds age 23 is no longer considered a dependent child and is not eligible for those benefits. In the course of making these changes, it was discovered that some changes to the correctional plans chapter was necessary. Quite a few years ago, that correctional plan, there was some amendments to the chapter to expand the categories of member, and it included then medical center protection officers. For some reason, this change did not cascade through the rest of the statute, so we're making some corrective changes now. And the final article, Article 3, changes the, there's a 6-month rule for, this is again for salary credit purchases for periods of reduced salary. So this is where someone is taking a leave, they have a period of reduced salary, say for disability. They are then able to return to employment and pay to purchase service credit for the period of the leave. There are some requirements in the statute right now that vary depending on the status of the individual, most of which are around 6 months, as long as they're able to purchase that leave 6 months after returning. This will make that consistently 12 months throughout the statutes. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Linczewski. And I see here Ms. Stringy is here to testify on this particular bill. Go ahead, Ms. Stringy.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, my name is Amy Stringy, Policy Coordinator for the Public Employee Retirement Association. Thank you, Susan, for that walkthrough. It was excellent. The bill before the Commission contains PERA's administrative provisions. PERA engaged internal staff and stakeholders in development of these provisions, and the PERA Board of Trustees approved the various provisions at its October and December board meetings. Article 1, as Susan said, directs us to our PERA membership salary threshold eligibility requirement. Currently, Minnesota Statute 353.01, Subdivision 2, sets an annual threshold to ensure mandatory PERA membership. The purpose of the threshold is to ensure mandatory membership for regular and recurring positions. The statute was last modified in 2014 when the monthly threshold of $425 was annualized to $5,100 for essentially non-school employees and $3,800 for school employees. The threshold itself was last increased in 1989. I will note that PERA's Board of Trustees has directed staff to work over the interim with stakeholders to review that amount and bring forward a recommendation for the 2024 legislative session. Currently, statute excludes members who make under that annualized threshold set in statute. However, the statute also requires that if an employee who had not been stipulated to meet that threshold does in fact meet that threshold, the employee is retroactively enrolled to the first month that member met that $425 threshold. This means that PERA bills the employer and employee for any omitted deductions during that time. Per statute, the employee pays their contributions for the most recent 60 days. Outside of that, the employer is responsible for their contributions for that time frame, and if outside of that time frame, both the member and employer contributions plus interest. If an employee is enrolled in PERA but does not meet that threshold, according to our deduction and error statute, the employee is refunded their contributions and the employer receives a credit. Since 2015, PERA has seen a 275% annual increase in deductions and errors, and PERA averages over 191 omitted deductions a year. This exhibits the problematic nature of an annual threshold for members, employers, and for PERA. The legislation before the Commission reverts us back to a monthly threshold for PERA membership eligibility. As a result, employees who are expected to earn $425 are automatically enrolled in the plan, and employees who are not expected to meet that but do meet that are caught within a month time frame versus the annual threshold versus the annual time frame that we currently have. Monthly thresholds will reduce the number of both omitted deductions and deductions in errors. From our engagement with employers, this will be a welcome change, and it will also benefit members and PERA. Article 2 provides a standardization of our dependent child definition and age for all of our plans. Currently, PERA General and PERA Correctional Plan dependent child benefits are payable under the age of 20 when the active vested member dies and there is no surviving spouse eligible for that survivor benefit. If the child is under age 15, the benefit is payable until age 20. If the child is over the age of 15, the benefit is payable for 5 years. The payment is actuarially equivalent to the present value of a 100% optional annuity, which is based on the ages of the member and the dependent child at the time of death. For PERA, police, and fire, if the member dies as an active, partially vested member, the dependent child receives the benefit if under 18, and if they are between 18 and 23, they must be full-time students to receive the benefit. The amount is equal to 10% of the member's average salary during the last 6 months of public employee. There is a survivor family maximum, which is 70%. It's 80% if that death is considered a duty-related death, and the family minimum benefit is 50%. Article 2 is standardizing that age to 23 for all of our plans. The result for PERA General and PERA Correctional is that the age of eligibility is increased to 23, and the benefits are payable to the age of 23. The result for PERA P&F is that those between the ages of 18 and 23 no longer need to meet that full-time student requirement, as we are eliminating that. Article 2 also adds a cross-reference to 524.2-120 subdivision 10, which is adding parameters to the conception during a member's lifetime for the definition of a dependent child. And lastly, Article 3 is addressing our leave purchase timeframe. Back in 2021, PERA made changes to the leave purchase timeframe for both members and employers. And currently, terminated members have 6 months after termination to make that purchase. For example, I'm talking about like a medical leave, for example, as an authorized leave. And except for workers' compensation, disability applicants cannot purchase any leave that occurred after the day of injury on file. So what this change is doing is allowing terminated members to purchase the period of leave essentially until the end of the next calendar year or fiscal year, which is in line with how our active members may purchase time. And in addition, disability applicants may now purchase other leaves outside of workers' compensation that have occurred after the date of injury. And also, disability applicants will have that same time frame. This change simply allows us to have one time frame for purchases. And with that, Madam Chair, I conclude my testimony, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Stringy. Do members have any questions? All right, no questions. Then we will, again, hold that until the end of hearing all three bills, and we will have a motion to move the three together. Our next item of business is to hear presentation of the Teachers Retirement Association, the 2023 administrative bill, and it should be in your packet labeled as number 23-03138. And before we do hear again from our testifiers, we will have nonpartisan staff, Ms. Lincheski, go over the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This one is really short. All it does is changes the requirements for the executive director from this language. The candidate has to have at least 5 years of experience on the administrative staff of a major retirement system, to the new language, which will be requiring at least 5 years of experience in either an executive level management position or in a position with responsibility for the governance, management, or administration of a retirement plan. This makes the TRA statute consistent with the MSRS and the PERA statutes, which, in all cases describe the criteria for selecting an executive director. The bill also removes a sentence that is duplicative. There are other places in the statutes that express this expense provision more accurately, so that's removed. And that's it, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Lincheski. And Ms. Dayton, any further testimony on this? I feel like we're kind of being redundant here, but I want to make sure that we get to hear from you as well.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you. My name is Holly Dayton. I'm the legislative liaison for the Teachers Retirement Association. As always, LCPR staff have done a great job of prepping commission members. The background on this really is that we are just trying to ensure that succession planning can take place appropriately when the time comes for us to seek a new executive director. The board did advance this at a previous meeting this year and asked that this be the totality of our administrative bill this year. So we tried to keep it simple, and we feel that these the executive director requirements would still be very appropriate, but just wide enough to allow us to cast the net and find a new executive director candidates in the future when that's when we're at that point. So appreciate the commission's time and our author's time as well.
Thank you, Ms. Dayton. Do we have any member questions? No member, well, very easy last two bills. Thank you, Ms. Dayton. So then our next item of business is just to combine the text from the three administrative bills to recommended passage in the House of Representatives and the Senate. I will move the DE1 amendment to House File 1199, Senate File 1308. Members, this amendment combines the three bills before us today in separate articles. We will incorporate the amendment and recommend the new language's passage by corresponding committees within the House and Senate. Any questions about this amendment or the process? Anyone? Okay, seeing that there are no questions to the DE1 amendment, we will take a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. And the motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. And back to House File 1199 or Senate File 1308 as amended. Any further discussions to that bill as amended?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Senator Pappas.
Madam Chair, then who's going to be the author of these combined three bills?
Let me just check with Ms. Lenczewski real quick. Did we have the, oh, got it right here. Okay, so we did actually talk about this. So the amendment, the authors will be Representative Wolgamott on the House side and then Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair.
Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I was just conferring with my colleague, Senator Pappas. As you know, I'm a nurse. In nursing, there's a rule of thumb. When you're learning something new, you see one, and then you do one, and then you teach one. The learning curve is steep, and you're expected to perform and perform well because lives are at stake. And it appears to me that in pensions, we skip the see one and we just do the do one. And so here I am, happy to do this with you. I support this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. And we have, luckily in this commission, we have amazing staff that will really walk us through and helping us through the process. So know that you will have all the support needed, and I know you're a chair as well, so it's a lot to take on, but we appreciate it. And we'll make it, staff will help make sure that it goes very smoothly. Any further discussion? Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just so I have an idea of the path for this, are you going to send this as a separate administrative bill to the House and the Senate? Or are you going to wait to combine this with other work of the commission before we send it to the respective chambers and the commissions of jurisdiction, committees of jurisdiction, et cetera?
Thank you, Representative O'Driscoll. So I think that for those of us who have been in pension for a while, this is actually a new process for us, that we haven't actually moved bills directly before like this. And so our hope was that this would sort of be our test run for sending bills directly. And so this will be moving on its own. I think what you were asking, because generally we would hold everything until the end and there's one bill that moves forward. Is that correct, Representative O'Driscoll?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You and I had discussed that there might be two bills. There might be a policy bill, and there might then be a fiscal bill dealing with other, maybe if I could use the term, weighty matters. And I was just wondering if this is going to be the only administrative bill or policy bill that you were sending, or if you're going to be sending out, I dare I use this term, different balloons over what we've had experienced over the weekend here, but just kind of looking for some guidance. Again, we've done it different ways, and I just want the commission to be familiar with how you plan to proceed so that there's clarity. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative O'Driscoll, thank you. And this process is new to me as well, and so we are still working through, but this bill will move on its own, and we will have other bills coming up that will be policy or finance bills, and we will work out the details of combining the bills and working through how a policy and a finance bill will be moving forward at the end of this particular session. So, and we will definitely be working with you and ensuring that the path forward, we will all be moving forward under the understanding of what we will be doing with the two leftover bills. Thank you. Senator Nelson.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I just have to ask this question. These are administrative bills, so there's no fiscal note. I understand that for all of these bills. But I just have a basic question, and maybe it's because it's my first time on pensions. But I can't quite reconcile in my mind how extending a dependent from age 18 to 23 does not have a fiscal impact. So if somebody could just address that briefly.
Sure, and thank you, Senator Nelson, and Ms. Stringy Director Stringy is coming back to answer that for us.
Madam Chair, Senator Nelson, the reason that there is no cost impact, particularly for the coordinated and the general plan, is that we're actually not changing the amount of benefit that is awarded to a dependent child. We're just simply extending the length of time, and then those that may be eligible. The cost there is minimum. The PNF plan is the only one that may see a small cost, given that we are extending the opportunity up till 23 and removing that full-time student requirement, but we don't see a ton of them. Let me give you how many PNF dependent child benefits we have in one moment. I'm gonna find it. The point is that we don't have many of them, and I have this in my notes, and now I can't find it. We have 95 child-dependent benefits that we are paying for the police and fire plan at this point. So the cost is minimum, and we are not asking for funding for it, and it will have no negative impact on the fund.
Follow-up, Senator Nelson?
Thank you, Madam Chair, thank you. So there is a fiscal cost, but it's being, a small fiscal cost, but it's being absorbed by the plan, if I understand correctly.
Yes, if there's any additional, Madam Chair, if there's any additional fiscal cost, then we are absorbing that cost.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Yes.
Madam Chair, I just want to make sure we don't ever get into another one of these red box situations where the legislature does something that is going to be helpful, but in the long run, it ends up costing extreme amounts. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. It's good for us to continually be vigilant about that. We don't want to put ourselves in a difficult situation down the road. Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing no further discussion, I will move House File 1199, Senate File 1308, as amended to be recommended to pass. This recommendation be forwarded to the House and Senate Committees on State and Local Government. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. And the motion passes, and the bill is recommended for passage within the corresponding House and Senate Committees of jurisdiction. Members, our final order of business is to hear presentation from the Commission's actuary on the investment rate of return actual assumption, so that members are more familiar with the concept before we consider bills. And we do have testifiers coming to explain this to us, and this is Mr. Schulte and Ms. Knudsen.
Morning, Madam Chair, Commission members. My name is Mark Schulte from VIA Actuarial Solutions. With me is my colleague Emily Knudsen. Today we're going to provide some background on the investment return assumption that we started discussing a couple weeks ago, and also have heard subsequent testimony about general education matters. So as we have more elaboration on this topic, that all the Commission members can understand the concepts behind the calculations. So with that, I'm going to turn over to my colleague Emily for the first part of our presentation.
Madam Chair, my name is Emily Knudsen. I'm an actuarial consultant with VIA Actuarial Solutions. I'd like to start by reviewing this slide that was presented a couple weeks ago. And it's to show the impact of the discount rate assumption or the return assumption. And so if a pension benefit of $1,000 is promised in 30 years, and you assume a 7.5% return for those 30 years, you will only need an initial contribution of $115. However, if over those 30 years, the fund only returns 6.5%, you're gonna have a funding shortfall of about $240. And you can see that's more than the initial contribution that was made. So it is a very important assumption that we need to get right. Now, as actuaries, we can't predict the future, but we do need to make assumptions using all the information available. We do want to get the assumption as close to future returns as possible. An important note on this is that the current investment mix is what determines the return assumption, not the other way around. Lowering the return assumption does not change the investment mix, and it does not change what will actually happen in the future. We also want to point out that no assumption is really a set it and forget it assumption. There's constantly new information becoming available each year, every day on how markets are moving. Just like all the other assumptions that are reviewed every 4 years, 5 years, including mortality, salary increases, this assumption should also be comprehensively reviewed every few years with refinements made as needed. We use the same methods and processes advocated by investment professionals, and our actuarial standards require us to consider forward-looking assumptions and to not rely solely on historical data. Historical returns can be subjectively high or low depending on the period you're looking at. For example, like the 10-year history would ignore the Great Recession. 20-year history would ignore the dot-com bust. And now this slide kind of goes through the process of how actuaries set this assumption. The pension fund and the SBI determine the investment policy and asset allocation based on both return and risk goals. Then investment professionals come up with forward-looking capital market assumptions. The actuary combines these two pieces and makes their assumption recommendation to the pension board. The pension board will then select an assumption based on this information. This may not be the actuary's recommendation. The pension board selects this assumption as in their capacity as fiduciaries, so they're acting in the best interest of plan members and plan sustainability, which we recognize can be a difficult balance. The actuaries prepared two main reports. The GASB accounting report uses the board-approved assumptions. Then the actuary also provides a funding report, and that uses the statutory assumptions. And the return assumption for that is set in statutes. In both cases, the actuary must comment on the reasonableness of these assumptions within their report. The median recommendation is generally you have your return assumption, and in the future, 50% of the time you will at least meet or exceed that, and 50% of the time you will meet or not meet it. So it's just like that 50-50, you're gonna get there. There is, reasonable does not have to be that 50%. You can maybe, if it's at least 35% likely to meet or exceed, that may be considered reasonable. It really is a professional judgment call there, and you just have to draw a line somewhere. So at this point, I would like to turn it over to my colleague Mark Schulte to go over some current issues, unless anyone has any questions they'd like to ask at this point.
Do members have any question on what has been presented so far? Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you tell me, I was just curious, when you talked about that slide where the actuary prepares the report on the board-approved assumptions and then they do their own and then the statutory assumptions. Should those be the same? Are they commonly the same or not?
Sorry, Representative.
And is there a benefit, I'm sorry, I'm thinking at the same time, Madam Chair. Is there a benefit to them being the same to the plan members? Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. And I just wanted to make sure that that if it's too many questions, you can break it up into multiple questions. Ms. Knudsen.
Madam Chair, Representative Nadeau, we are going to get into that a little bit later in the presentation, but ideally they would be the same, but they don't have to be. It can make it easier to understand, but we will do a deeper dive on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a brief question also to that slide. So there is fiduciaries' responsibilities for the plan holders. There is the pension fund, the board that approves the assumptions. And I wanted a little more information on the fiduciary requirements of the board. Does the board assumption, or maybe it's not a fiduciary assumption, I'm just wondering where in these assumptions, which we know are so important to our plan health and able to meet their promises, where is the fiduciary for a state government? In other words, when I say state government, I mean for the state taxpayers. Because obviously on many of these plans, the state taxpayers in general, pay a portion, those employers pay a portion of that, or if there's a inadequacy, then again, it comes back to the legislature. So who is the fiduciary for the legislature, or let's just expand that to the state taxpayers?
Ms. Knutson.
Madam Chair, I would like to turn this over to my colleague, Mr. Schulte.
Mr. Schulte.
Madam Chair, Senator Nelson, the fiduciary, really, the boards are the fiduciaries for these plans in selecting the assumptions. So they are charged with selecting the assumptions in the best interest of everybody, like to manage long-term plan sustainability. There's not another gatekeeper with fiduciary responsibility other than the boards in selecting these assumptions. Nobody else at the legislature, not the commission, but it's really the boards in their role as fiduciaries select the assumptions. So they're really balancing a lot of different priorities at the same time.
Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's what I needed to hear.
Thank you. Any further questions before we move on to the next section? Okay, Mr. Schulte, please proceed.
Madam Chair. So what I'd like to talk about now is sort of the current issues and why we keep revisiting this topic, because it's come up quite a bit the past couple of years, and it will likely keep coming up unless some action is taken. And so in this slide, what we have is just a comparison of where we're at with the current assumptions. And in statutes, we have this funding assumption that is used to determine the contribution sustainability or deficiency, to measure that each year, which is at 7.5% annual returns. Then we have the proposed rate of 7, and then also the separate board-approved assumptions that are used for accounting purposes and which have been selected by the boards as their best estimates. And we can see that there's this discrepancy, not only between what the current statutory assumption is and the proposed, but also that there's different assumptions between each fund. And that part is actually, I'm very comfortable with as an independent actuary, because people are gonna have different opinions. You know, we mentioned as in their role as fiduciaries, they're considering a lot of different topics and a lot of different factors. One board has come up with one decision, another board has another. I'm okay with that. The issue is that the discrepancy between the statutory assumption and each of those individual board assumptions. And the fact that we also have some of the system actuaries saying that they believe the current statutory assumption is not reasonable anymore in their professional opinion. So that's really the issue I would like to address today, is focusing on not only adjusting the statutory assumption so it's closer to where the funds would like to be, but also considering in the future whether it would be allowable to have separate funding assumptions for each fund based on their fiduciary choice as to what that assumption is.
Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Schulte, just want to make sure that everybody is clear on what the third line, board and accounting assumptions, those have been adopted by the various plans, is that correct?
Mr. Schulte.
Madam Chair, Representative Driscoll, that is correct.
Madam Chair.
Representative O'Driscoll.
And Mr. Schulte, you had indicated that you're comfortable with different assumed rates of return for the different plans. And I'm paraphrasing what I thought I heard you say, and that is just based on the different inputs and the different timelines and payouts and some of those kinds of things. If I'm asked as a legislator by a counterpart in the legislature or a member of the public or even somebody who's in these plans, what are things I should tell them that justify why PRA would be at 6.5% and say TRA at the 7%? How would I explain that to them, that those are impacts and how that works? And if I could just qualify, not as an actuary, but as a legislator.
Mr. Schulte.
Madam Chair, Representative Driscoll, well, that's a tough task, because there is definitely professional judgment here. And I think what you have to say is that PERA has selected their assumption based on their outlook of their fund's risk in balancing their different priorities. TRA has selected a different assumption based on their own circumstances and priorities. The challenge is they're all invested the same. And I think what I'm going to talk to in a little bit is having a assumption review at the SBI level from a third party that would recommend an assumption would probably coalesce those board approved assumptions over the long term. If we had, instead of right now they're recommended by different actuaries and the boards are making different decisions, but if there's really one funnel of advice from a single investment consultant, more than likely the boards would gravitate towards a more uniform assumption.
Representative O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Schulte, I mean, if you take a look at that, it's a very small sample. I mean, your median, mode, and I mean, you got all three of them there, right? You've got halfway up, halfway down, the mathematical average. The thing you probably don't have is the mode, the most common on that. But your point is what I was trying to drive at. Those funds are invested by the same investment advisor in a pool of investments. I don't know that they necessarily segregate those into different types of investment risks based on what we heard the executive director say last week, that it's long-term, prudent investing, head down, keep things going, and that's where you can minimize risk, which I do agree with. I'm just still trying to reconcile in my head why we can have a 0.5% difference between the two. I don't mean to belabor it, but that is going to be an important question that I know I'm going to be asked by my colleagues in the legislature and by other interested parties. Is that the right bogey on there? And why is it that we can't be at 7.5%, or excuse me, 7% as MSRS or PERA if TRA is, or why are the rest of them not coming down to where we are at 6.5%? We've got some really tough conversations, I think, coming ahead of us, and we need to be armed with facts to be able to help support that.
Representative O'Driscoll, and maybe if I could just, and to help clarify, because this helps me as well, but when we look at different plans, right, there are different factors in risk. This is when we manage the rate of return assumption is managing risk for those plans. And so if a plan is actually more funded than another one, they might be willing to take different type of risk, even though, I mean, these are still our plans that are very conservatively invested in because we are trying, you know, we have to protect the funds, but, you know, there are different factors within each plan that might determine why the rate of return would be a little bit different, in addition to like how much it's already funded now, or, you know, the plan itself, maybe those who are fiduciaries of that, who make up that group, maybe their views of what they think is considered risky versus less risky is a little bit different, which then goes into determining this rate. Is that correct, Mr. Schulte?
Madam Chair, I think that's on point, that it's really their independent views. They're all invested the exact same, but some of the funds have just a different approach to what they're willing to accept as the risk that's built into the assumption. So I'd say that the 6.5%, they're being a little more conservative on their outlook. 7%, a little less conservative.
Thank you, Mr. Schulte. Senator Friends.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and you stole a couple points I was going to make, but thanks for the presentation. Representative, I think each board has its own dynamics, retirement age, benefit, what the goals of the boards are. They may be different for a cop than for a teacher, and that's okay. I appreciate your statements right in our materials. That's okay for the funding assumptions. Again, call the Pension Commission's attention to the fact that the funding status, which is really the key issue here as we look at the rate of return, has profound implications for the actives and the retirees. So we're not just talking about the math of these funds and their funding status. We're talking about men and women who rely on these pensions and how a funding status change might cause a board or a pension commission to make decisions about COLA, about retirement benefits, and all kinds of other cool stuff that I'm guessing we'll talk about soon. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Friends. Any further, Representative O'Driscoll?
Thank you. Just one follow-up. You know, and I can justify, and I know what I'm going to tell people when I'm asked that question because of knowing the inputs and having been around here for a while. With TRA, we know from previous life expectancy studies and different things that is the longest living group that we have of pensionees. And so if you're invested over a longer period of time, the logic would dictate that you'd be able to pick up longer rates of return the longer you're invested. So I can justify that in my mind. And I can also, within MSRS and PERA, understand that you've got police and fire, which have a shorter life expectancy, or state patrol, and those kinds of things. Again, I just want to make sure that everybody, because a lot of new people are in here, and you're going to get a lot of questions from a lot of people on this particular item this session. There's three things I think we're looking at, and this is the first shot over the bow that you're going to get a lot of questions from your colleagues on.
Thank you, Representative O'Driscoll. And Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I've been approached with some people saying they want to take the rate assumption out of statute and leave it to the boards themselves or leave it to the SBI to do that. What is the advantages and disadvantages of doing that?
Mr. Schulte.
Madam Chair and Representative Nelson, that's actually a recommendation we're going to make towards the end of this presentation, is that long-term we'd like to see these long-term investment return assumptions move out of the statute into the LCPR's actuarial standards to, number one, remove a legislative obstacle to the changes that has been there in the past when there's been a proposal to change assumptions and they just haven't been able to do it because either legislation doesn't go anywhere or is vetoed. But I'd say the main advantage is that the main gatekeeper to this assumption is the pension boards right now as far as selecting what they think in the best interest in the role as fiduciary is for each of these funds. And they are making that decision. Their actuaries are signing off on it or not. They're opining on it at least, whether they think that's reasonable. So those two structures are still in there for governance purposes. Plus, it would require LCPR approval to amend the LCPR actuarial standards. So I think we still have plenty of safety valves on the assumption, a good governance process if it was moved to the standards, and it would just remove the obstacle of having an assumption that's not able to be amended as needed. And not that we'd advocate a frequent amendment, but when it needs to be amended, it needs to be amended, and sometimes it's just not possible if there's a legislative hurdle there.
Representative Nelson. And if we could just finish up the presentation since Representative Nelson segued us into this, and then we can ask the remainder of our questions after that.
I was gonna say, let's go with the
Madam Chair, okay, I'll move through the last few slides here relatively quickly. A point that we've made, and I won't belabor too much, is the actuaries are not necessarily setting the assumption. We're opining on whether we believe it's reasonable, and if it's not, then usually disclaimer goes in the report, and that's been the case in the funding reports for the MSRS and PERA plans. TRA's actuary, the 7.5% is still reasonable in their opinion, just on the very high end of that reasonability range. As I mentioned, it's not that this assumption needs to be changed frequently, but we as actuarial professionals need to evaluate it at least on an annual basis, and it should be reviewed from time to time. The next slide just has some commentary we pulled. So the past couple of years, the retained actuaries for all the systems have done an analysis of the investment return assumption, and they're really good. They've put a lot of time and effort into this, so if you have a chance to request and read those, I'd highly recommend it. They're relatively concise letters, but they lay out the process that they've gone to get to their conclusions. And I've excerpted here some comments from the PERA and MSRS actuary, and just to lay out, their recommendation is somewhere between 5.64 and 6.55%. And that is just substantially lower than the current statutory rate, which is why we're here today discussing this assumption. Even that, picking a rate, they could support a rate up to 6.84%, so roughly 6 3/4. But I think that the key comment here is picking a rate at the high end of the range doesn't guarantee that they're gonna view it as reasonable over the long term. So if you can pick something closer to the median of the recommendation, it'll be more sustainable, and we won't have to be discussing this year after year after year. Whereas if you pick something at the high end of the range all the time, we end up with these discussions again coming up. Similar, the TRA actuary, they were able to sign off on 7.5% this year, but they had a similar comment of it's at the high end of their range of reasonability, and that it might not take much for that to fall out of the range. Lastly, just some extra numbers here. This is also from the PERA and MSRS actuaries analysis. They looked at some projections of what the likelihood is of reaching that 7.5% return, and also other returns. And the key one I'd like to point out is over in the 7.5% column. The likelihood of being below that assumption is essentially 2/3. And the only likelihood of exceeding that assumption of 1/3, which aren't great odds. And we'd really like that to be closer to 50-50, which would be the median assumption. Even 6.5 is in much better position. 7 would be somewhere in between there. But just to provide some context of, it's not very likely in their opinion to reach that 7.5% assumption. And then our last slide is just recommendations. Near term, this isn't a perfect world. So reducing the investment return assumption to 7% would definitely be a step in the right direction. That would be kudos to make that adjustment. Also, we'd really highly recommend, and this may be on the schedule over the next year or so, is to have an investment consultant hired by the SBI or the LCPR to directly come up what they believe the investment return assumption would be in their opinion after looking at the detailed investments. Longer term, As I mentioned, moving that investment return assumption to the actuarial standards provide a little more direct route to being updated if it and when it needed to be. Also allowing separate funding assumptions for each plan. This could cause some issues with clarity as far as why are different funds using different assumptions. I think this could be managed by the LCPR could also require using the average and having it, each fund could have their own calculation for sufficiency, deficiency, but also recalculate it at a single rate, whether that's 6 3/4 or 7%, similar to how the boards up this year in their presentations did it at 7.5 and 7 to sort of present the results. And then again, just having recurring investment consultant analysis independent at the SBI, so they can really get into the weeds on what they think this return should be over the long term. And with that, I'm glad to answer any more questions folks may have.
Members, do we have any additional questions? Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess I got a question on the first, I'll be slide 2, back where the $115 and the assumptions of, I'd be curious to know what that dollar amount at 6.5% initial investment would have to be to match the $1,000, if that's been calculated. If it's not, we can get that later from you. The other question I have goes back to the assumption, the rate assumption. Currently, the state is putting in additional funds, money into most of these plans to deal with past shortfalls and to deal with some mergers that took place in the past of merging other funds into them. And some of those are slated to go away once the plans get to 100% funding. Could changing the rate of assumption be a way to game those systems so that they look like they're less well-funded and go with an extremely low rate of return so that they can continue getting the state money? And again, we want to make sure these plans stay solvent, but I mean, could somebody game those so that they can end up hanging on to those state contributions that are being made?
Mr. Schulte.
Madam Chair, Representative Nelson. Yeah, I definitely wouldn't use the term gaming, that it would really be right sizing so that we have an accurate view of what the funded status is. But yeah, it would, if it could extend the period and maybe even enhance the funds that are going into the pension systems from the state, that would be excellent, to really shore up the funded status. And your other question about the dollar amount at 6.5%, I don't have that with me. Glad to calculate. My calculator's in my briefcase, but after I can do that quickly.
Thank you.
Mr. Schulte, would you be able to get us some of that information for Representative Nelson and the committee members later? I think the calculation he was asking for.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Rasmussen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make a couple comments and appreciate the conversation here today, and I know we'll be talking more about this issue in the future. I think members of the commission should take a good hard look at page 11 in the presentation. And this is a pretty concerning page. Basically what we're hearing is that the median investment return projection, at least from this consultant, is 5.64%, which is almost 2 percentage points lower than what our current rate of assumption is. And to make sure that folks understand how sensitive this is, when we were talking about TRA's assumed return, I believe a week or two ago, 50 basis points, 0.5%, had a $2 billion impact on the unfunded liability just for TRA. And so if the assumption is off by 2 percentage points, we're talking more than probably $10 billion potentially in unfunded liabilities that we're just not going to be seeing because we're looking at that 7.5%. And so I think that is the concern, is that these numbers add up really quickly. The second thing I would say is on this conversation on having separate funding assumptions for each plan, my perspective on that is that it really doesn't make sense because all these plans are invested in the same asset pool. They will have the same actual rate of return. And the other risk factors in terms of the who lives longer or the other makeup, that's going to be captured in other actuarial assumptions. And the other concern I have is it could provide a perverse incentive for plans that are less well funded than other plans to just claim a higher assumed rate of return to make their numbers look better. And so when this commission is reviewing funded ratios, when reviewing sufficiency, we'll be looking at kind of different math that doesn't make sense. And so I do think, and just also want to thank all the plans for taking a look at this and coming to the commission with a unified recommendation of moving down to 7%, and I know we'll continue that conversation.
Thank you, Senator Rasmussen. And Mr. Schulte, could you just maybe talk a little bit to what Senator Rasmussen said? Because just a reminder to the members that when SBI looks at the pool of funds that they have to invest in, it's all of the plans are together. So it's not like they're investing separately for TRA, investing separately for PRA. Can you just then maybe talk a little bit to PRA and why then the assumptions would, even though each plan is different and they have different, components to them that, when somebody retires or how much the benefit is, why would the assumption be different since they're all being invested as one pool of money? If you could maybe respond to that.
Madam Chair, Senator Rasmussen. Yeah, I'd say that you're correct that they're all invested the same. It's one big pool of money. Mm-hmm. And so their separate positions on what they think the investment return is really their opinion. And kind of, if you looked at what's the stock market going to return next year, you ask different investment consultants, they'd have different opinions. So they've taken the data available to them and they've come up with different opinions. There's definitely an advantage to having a single assumption, mostly for clarity, because it would be the same for all the plans. I think that is still available. I just would not be opposed to them having individual assumptions for analyzing the sufficiency deficiency, but also maybe having more standardized assumption, whether that's done by averaging the three or however they want to come to a more standardized assumption.
Thank you, Mr. Schulte. Any further discussion from Representative O'Driscoll?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I always want to underscore something that Senator Rasmussen said, and that is it's very important that we look at getting these assumptions correct, because we can say, you know what, let's put it at 9.5%, and we could show that we've got sufficiencies and what our plans are, but that's not the reality of where it is. I've been on this commission for a long time, and I preach one message when it comes to this: the closer to zero we get the rate of return, the easier it is to hit that rate of return, and that takes a lot of risk out of the funds, it takes a lot of risk out of the market, takes a lot of risk out of Wall Street viewing Minnesota, and it's unfunded liabilities. And so I think that the commission needs to make sure that they have a comfort level with this. And Madam Chair, I think it might be prudent as well with this discussion on lowering the assumption to maybe consider having the executive director of the SBI back so that the commission can ask some individual questions about how that investment process works. We were a little rushed the day that she was here, and maybe an opportunity to spend another 25, 30 minutes just quizzing her or her giving us a tutorial about how they invest, because the funds are invested in the aggregate, and then we're trying to put them into the individual plans outcomes on that. And when you have different rates of return, but you're investing the monies the same way, that does get a little bit, in my mind, I won't say scary, but a little bit disconcerting about how you end up getting to the end game with the individual plans and stuff. And so this issue of rate of return, Representative Nelson knows, has been around here longer than we've been here on the commission, that's for sure. And Senator Pappas as well.
Thank you, Representative O'Driscoll. And I think that I've always been very interested in how SBI does the investments as well, so it would warrant maybe just another 20-minute conversation on that. Thank you for that suggestion. Any further questions from our members? Representative Nadeau.
I think I have one question, Madam Chair. You have the actuaries for the plans making a recommendation that the board may or may not go with. You have a board making an assumption and choosing a rate of return that this body may not have value in. We've got, what is the significance of having all these different plans and all these different actuaries and all these different people putting these assumed rates out there, and then we really only have one anyway at the end of the day? How did we get to the point where we have so many people commenting and putting numbers out there that none of us actually, we discuss them, but I can't see that they matter. Do they matter?
Mr. Schulte.
Madam Chair, Representative Nadeau, I think what I understand from your question is why, do the assumptions matter if there's such a varying degree of opinion?
Right.
They definitely do. You have to have an opinion because these are such important promises that have been made to the pensioners, and they're invested long-term to fund these promises, and we need to have a best estimate. The fact that there's a difference in opinion and best estimate, I think if we look back at the slide that has the three funds' opinion, that they may vary by quarter of a point of interest, you know, between a couple of funds, 50 basis points for all three, but they're still relatively close. I think the main concern is the long-term assumption in statute of 7.5 is beyond what the actuarial professionals believe is reasonable in the long term. We need to get to a reasonable assumption so that we can make sure these benefits are promising. We have to have some sort of assumption because these systems are in place to provide such important benefits. We have to be careful not to be too conservative and necessarily go to zero because these funds are invested for the long term to help fund the pensions. But being prudent with the assumption, I think, is different than being conservative or aggressive. You know, that's really what a fiduciary does. They act with prudence in selecting an appropriate assumption. Does that answer your question?
Madam Chair, and it does, yes. I mean, I understand the process. It just seems convoluted. And it just, I recognize that everybody has different opinions and they put them down there, but we never go with the actuarial, I mean, we're far beyond those. So that I guess that's my thing, and I'll continue to listen and try to learn, but we don't really pay attention to what the what the actuaries are saying. If it's 5.64 and we're considering a 7, I mean, and I just learned from, Senator Rasmussen that could be $10 billion difference. And that's where, I guess that's where my confusion is. If we're not gonna focus on, and I know there's political things on here too, but if we're not gonna focus on that and we're not gonna listen, and it's not that we're not gonna listen, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. We have to find a path through the middle, and I haven't seen it yet. I'm sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And before I go to Senator Pappas, I think Ms. Linczewski has something to comment on this particular issue.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Nadeau. I just want to make a comparison to other states. So other states have a really streamlined system where they've got pension plans that have boards of trustees. The boards have actuaries who are their experts. They advise the boards who are the fiduciaries, and then they set the rate. So they don't then come to the commission. They don't have commissions like this. They don't come to the legislature. Fiduciaries at other plans, they, in their, using their fiduciary judgment and their expert, they set the rate. So often it's not even political. It's just based on expert information and fiduciary duty.
Representative Nadeau.
One follow-up. Is that similar to what, for example, the trades have with their pension plans?
Ms. Linczewski.
Yes. Representative Nadeau, you are correct. That is similar.
Thank you.
Senator Pappas.
Yeah, Madam Chair, when Ms. Schultz comes in from SBI, I think it would be really interesting to kind of take a 30-year look back in investments. When I started on the Pension Commission, our assumed rate of return was 8.5%. And that really was what the average had been. Well, I think it was even higher over the previous maybe 20 years. So why that is, consistently coming down, the actuaries are coming in with lower numbers, it'd be really interesting to learn more about that.
Thank you, Senator Pappas. Representative O'Driscoll.
I hate to, keep chiming in, but I think this is also an important point to Representative Nadeau's question. We get data from a lot of different sources, from the commission's actuary, from the plan's actuaries, from others. And our job is to kind of weight that information as a commission and make a decision about what we think with those different data inputs is the best decision that we would proceed forward with. And as you've heard earlier, the legislature in statute would be the one who would set that. And there's a contemplation of moving that to this body, this 14-member body, consisting of members of the House and the Senate, to make that decision independent of a full legislature on there. There are advantages and there are disadvantages to doing that. But that's where we've always done it in the past, is grab the input from a lot of different sources, and then we evaluate it, and we ask questions, and then we make a decision moving forward. And that's just a little bit more kind of color or background for why we've done what we've done in the way we've done it.
Thank you, Representative O'Driscoll, for that. I would just ask if Mr. Schulte knows this, or if maybe Ms. Linczewski, but I do understand after looking at the language that all of the other assumptions, there used to be assumptions that were also in statute, but those have all been moved off into the LCPR actuary standards. Do you have any idea as to why this one was left and the other ones were moved away? Any, Mr. Schulte or Ms. Linczewski? Ms. Linczewski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's politics. Yeah, so there was a thought that the other assumptions, such as mortality, salary increase, payroll increase, those could all be moved. There wasn't as much interest on the part of the legislature in those assumptions. So we have moved them all, I think in 2018, from being in the statute to being in our so-called standards and an appendix to the standards. But we did not at that time attempt to move the rate of return because it has always been a very political decision.
Thank you, Ms. Linczewski. Any further questions from members for our testifiers today? Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just not for the testifiers, but for Ms. Linczewski. I thought that might be the answer, that it's politics, but I think it's important to note that the assumed rate of return does not affect the actual return at all. So if it was pure politics, you know, one could say the assumed rate of return is going to be 10%. We would not do that. But I'm just saying that's the fact. So the while we say it's politics, it's really not politics. It's fantasy. It might be what we would dream it would be. I think that's an important point. Thank you.
Any response, Ms. Linczewski? Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I am, of course, listening carefully and leaning on my colleagues to appreciate the history of the issues that we're discussing right now. And I did really appreciate the directness just now of Ms. Linczewski about the political nature of the decision. I think that candor is really important. And when I hear politics, what I think about is the value of the question to all of the stakeholders, and that there are people who are in this room whose lives are attached to this discussion who put a high premium on the question that we're discussing. And thus it is political because there is a big stake in the matter. That is what I think about when I hear it's political. It's because it is a high priority. It has a high premium for the people who have a stake in the decision making. So I really appreciated your directness on that and wanted to share, again, as a newer member of this commission, how I hear that for those who might be listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. Any other comments?
Madam Chair.
Senator Friends.
Yeah, just briefly. Thank you, everybody. I can tell we got a little more discussion here. You know, we're talking about how we set the assumed rate of return because, as I said, it affects directly choices we make about COLA, about benefits, all the other assumptions, and it's a good point why it's still left in there. Of the 3-year, 5-year, 10-year, 20-year, and 30-year rates of return, they're all above 8%. So that if you look at the facts, the actual rate of return, we're talking about lowering it to something that's well below those particular historical norms. And I would just put it this way. If we're going to take this assumption and put it to the boards, why don't we take the COLA authority and put it to the boards? Why don't we take the benefits? I mean, the reason this matters is the funding status, which Wall Street cares about, Representative. We're currently AAA bond rated as a state. Wall Street thinks we're a very well-run state, and part of that is the excellent work on pensions. Just throwing it out there, that the rate of return in the last 30 years includes several benchmarks at which the rate of return was above 8%. And so as I hear lowering the assumed rate of return, I also hear, and therefore it will be tougher to provide benefits for members that have been working their whole lives, cops, teachers, and state employees. And that, I think, is my hesitation on the assumed rate of return, is not that I'm into the math so much as I kind of wonder what will be the next argument when we try to support the working men and women. That's what's really going on here. And to Senator Murphy's point, that's the people sitting in this room who maybe don't even care about the assumed rate of return, but they care very much that inflation is crunching their COLA benefits. And so into that, Madam Chair, I look forward to the next chance to discuss it.
Thank you, Senator Frantz. Any other questions? Senator Howe.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to caution, I agree that if you go 10, 20, 30 years, it's all been over 8%. But if you go in the last quarter or the last year, I think you'll find that it's much more volatile than it ever used to be as far as our assumptions and our rate of return. You know, you look at the last 5 year, it's 6.7. So I think the market's much more volatile. I think the SBI has done a great job, but I do believe that we have to be cautious in what we do, because we don't want to be in the same position as many other states are, and they're upside down and underwater, that will, I think, have a hard time coming back. So I think we need to be cautious and be reasonable. That's in my viewpoint. I think that's, I also think that we are the taxpayers' voice on this, as well as the pensioners. And keep in mind, I got a vested interest in this because I have 3 of those pensions. So I definitely want them to be there at the end of the day, and especially for my spouse when I'm gone. So I've got a vested interest in making sure that these are there at the end of the day. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Howe. And I will just say really quickly that I think that we're having such amazing conversation today around this. I think this is the most robust conversations we've had about this topic in the 4 years that I've been here, and I appreciate that. And I would just like to say that I think that sometimes we have these conversations, and and I'm not saying our members are doing this, but I think that, you know, we look at everything and like, if you do this, this will happen. And I think that we can look at it as an all-comprehensive. We can look at the rate of return and assumption, but also say that we understand the markets right now, the impact it has on the retirees. And are those two things tied together? They could be, but are there things that we can do to really look at the members and how we can help them during these really difficult times outside of the assumed rate of return? Absolutely. And so we do have a great opportunity here. Though I am still disappointed in the governor's target for our pension commission, I have hope that the Senate and the House will come in with a much higher number for us to be able to really do right by our retirees, and that this conversation is very important. And how do we as a group start to pull out what is political and what is not? What are the things that we need to do, but what are the ways we take care of our retirees, and how are those tied together, or are those separate? And I think that we are such a talented commission that I have every hope that we can figure that out. And so I thank you all for the robust conversation today. This does conclude our business for today. I'm going to let Mr. Schulte and Ms. Knutson go, because we have asked him a lot of questions. But I just want to state next that our commission hearing will be next Monday, February 13th, and we will be hearing legislation regarding the plan's rate of return assumptions and presentation from the Department of Labor and Industry on their policy disability benefits and adequacy study. That was a lot. So seeing that there's no further business in front of this committee, this meeting is adjourned.